Have you heard opening an offshore bank account is nearly impossible? Well, after helping thousands of people protect their money offshore, I guarantee you it's not. And with all these recession fears, trade wars, and cross-border changes that have shaken up 2025 so far, diversifying your wealth offshore has never been more important. So in this video, I'm going to show you the easy 4-step process to opening your own offshore bank account, guaranteed. And this first step is super important. In fact, the only step that's more important is step number 4, which is basically a cheat code to open any offshore bank account that you want. But if you get this first step wrong, step number 4 obviously doesn't matter. And that's because step number 1 is going to determine which banks you can open with, whether you can open remotely or not, and how much money you're going to need to deposit. But more importantly, it's also going to determine how safe your money is going to be and how easy it's going to be for you to access it. So, step number 1 is determining which countries you can bank in. Now, there are a lot of countries that you can choose from when it comes to offshore banking, so this might seem like it could be complicated, but it's actually not. And to help you figure this out for yourself, we're going to be answering 4 questions that will point you to the right countries for account opening. Now, these 4 questions, they act like a funnel to help you narrow down your options, kind of like this. Now, I'm going to quickly run through these for you so you can determine where to open accounts for yourself offshore. But there's also an easier way for you to do this, and it's by using our free assessment, which you can access in the description below, and our team will just tell you which countries you qualify to bank in. So feel free to use that if you're interested. Now back to our questions. And question number 1 is, what's your citizenship? But unless you're from a super high-risk country, what I'm really asking here is, are you an American? Now, if you are an American, don't worry, there are offshore banking hubs that you can access. But if you're not an American, say you're a Canadian, a Brit, German, or Australian, then you'll have many more offshore banking jurisdictions that you can choose from. But your citizenship, it's not the only factor. In fact, it's not even the most important factor. Instead, your answer to this next question is, which is, what's your residency? Where do you live, make money, and pay taxes? And no surprise, certain countries of residence are a lot better when it comes to having offshore banking options than others. Though even if you have a super easy to bank citizenship and residency, it doesn't matter if the bank doesn't want you as a customer. And that's why question number 3 is, how much money can you deposit? Remember, this is offshore banking. If you want a zero deposit account, you should go check your local Wells Fargo, TD Bank, or NatWest branch. I'm sure they're going to be more than happy to open an account for you. But offshore, you need to be coming in with a sizable balance to access the best banks. Now, I'm going to tell you exactly how much money you need to deposit in a minute. But first, you still have one other question that you need to answer to determine where to open your accounts. And this last one, it might surprise you because almost nobody thinks about it when it comes to banking offshore. It's, what's your reason for banking offshore? Now listen, there are a lot of good reasons to open an offshore bank account, from diversification and security to accessing specific investments and many other reasons. But not all countries are suited to every reason. In a lot of countries, you need clear economic ties, or what bankers tend to call substance, in order to even qualify to open an account. And if you don't have substance, you don't qualify to bank there. This all comes down to local banking rules and making sure whatever reason you have for banking offshore gets your foot in the door in the first place. Okay, now selecting the right country is obviously very important, but these other 3 steps are just as important in opening your offshore bank account. And like I said, step number 4 is probably the most important out of everything that we're going to cover because it can help you overcome basically every other hurdle that we discuss. So let's keep moving and take a look at step number 2, which is probably the most obvious step that we're going to be covering in this video. And that's because it's determining which banks will accept you. Now, like I said, this is a no-brainer. You probably guessed that this would be on the list, but I don't think anyone watching this video is going to guess what step number 3 is, which we're going to be covering next. But first, how do you determine which banks will accept your profile? Well, in addition to the 4 questions we just covered in step number 1, there's another 4 questions that I want you to answer in order to find specific banks that are willing to cater to you. Question number 1 is all about your money, where it comes from, how you make it, and how you can prove it. And depending on your answer to this question, certain banks will be happy to onboard you, while others don't want anything to do with you. So the question here is, what is your source of income and source of wealth? If you're a business owner with savings spanning 20 years of operations, you have lots of banking options. But if you're a crypto trader who's made millions in the last 18 months, you're going to have a harder time finding banks to open accounts for you. The point is, how you make or made your money, it matters. And different banks are willing to accommodate different sources of income or wealth. Okay, question number 2 is about how much you're worth. But there's a bit of a twist here, because I'm not just talking about your net worth. Now, this does vary by country, but the question that you need to answer is what is your total liquid net worth? I'm talking securities like stocks, bonds, ETFs, cash, precious metals, and even crypto in certain instances. And a lot of banks want to make sure that you have enough liquid assets to qualify for their services. If this happens, it's usually an indication of sophisticated investor status. Think 1 million in liquid net assets or more. Now, this is not a requirement at all offshore banks, but many of the banks in top jurisdictions that people ask us about, think Singapore, do require this level of status in order to qualify to bank there. Also, if this is a requirement when opening, you don't have to deposit this much in the account. Instead, the bank just wants to see that you have these liquid assets available. That way, you qualify for their services overall. Now, liquid net worth is very different than the deposit that you're going to have to make, and that's the topic of question number 3. But we're going to take it a step further and talk about what happens after the account is opened, because that's what banks really care about. You see, your deposit gets the door open, but to stay in the bank, you need to continue demonstrating that you qualify for this particular bank and the services that they're looking to offer. And that's why question number 3 is how much will you keep as a balance in the account? See, I'm not talking about what you deposit on day 1. I'm talking about the account balance on day 100 or day 500. And if your answer is less than you plan on depositing on day 1, you're going to have a hard time finding banks that actively want you as a client. So this is important to think about before you decide where you want to apply for an account. Now, we just have one more question before we move on to step number 3. And this one is all about moving money. But there are a lot of layers to this. Think the countries you plan on sending money to and from, the people you send to or receive money from, the banks, currencies, frequencies, and even amounts involved. And of course, your reasons for every transaction. That's why question number 4 is what is your planned transaction activity? Because when it comes to deciding which banks you can open with, your planned transaction activity is one of the most important factors to consider, which is why you need to describe your planned transaction activities during the application process with all banks. But just having acceptable transaction activities, enough money, liquid assets, or an acceptable source of wealth, it's not enough. Not enough to open with the right bank. And that brings us to the 3rd step in order to successfully open your offshore bank account. Like I said, I don't think anyone is going to guess this, because what I'm talking about is becoming an attractive customer for offshore banks. And your attractiveness, it's going to be determined by how easy you are to have as a customer and then how profitable you'll be for the bank. The first part of this equation, how easy you are as a customer, it's handled by the questions that we've already discussed. So in step number 3, what we're really focusing on is profitability, becoming profitable for the bank. Because at the end of the day, banks are businesses and they want to generate a return from their operations. And offshore banks typically generate returns through one of 5 ways, which you can then use to make yourself a more attractive customer to the bank. So the first way that banks generate returns is through basic account and service fees. Think monthly maintenance fees or transaction fees. Now, I'm mentioning this because it's an obvious way that banks generate a return. But paying basic fees, it's not exactly going to make you an attractive customer to the bank, at least not like the next 4 items that we're going to discuss. But banks do make money this way, and your willingness to pay basic fees will increase the number of options available to you. The second way that banks generate money is through wealth management and investment services. This can be a percentage of assets, a performance fee, or even fees for advisory services depending on the bank that you're with. These fees can go a long way to making you more attractive. But to move the needle, you need to have a high balance with the bank in the first place. Next up are advanced product and service fees. Now, there's a lot that can fall into this bucket, and frankly, it's going to be bank dependent. But you can think of products and services, letters of credit, bank guarantees, structured products, custody of precious metals, safe deposit boxes, nominee services, etc., etc. There's a lot that can fit in here, and the specific products or services available totally depends on the bank and your needs. Now, number 4 on this list is Lombard loans, or asset-backed financing. Not all banks are going to offer this service, but if they do, it can be a great way for you to unlock liquidity in a tax-optimized way. Now, not all banks offer this service, but if they do, it can be a great way to unlock liquidity in a tax-optimized way. Obviously, consult your tax professional first, but it's also an attractive service to banks because it typically means you have a reasonably large portfolio or cash position at the bank in the first place. And then the bank's just going to charge you interest in order to use this. So it's a win-win. Okay, now even if none of the options we just discussed apply to your situation, don't worry, number 5 on this list is almost guaranteed to apply to anyone looking for offshore or private banking. And as soon as I finish explaining this option to you, I'm going to share step number 4 to opening your offshore account. And like I said, step number 4 is the most important step in the whole process, and it's also the easiest way to open any bank account that you want. But first, we need to talk about the 5th way to make yourself profitable, which is foreign exchange services. And like I said, this applies to almost everyone looking for offshore banking, because the vast majority of people who want to bank offshore have some level of foreign currency requirements. Whether that's holding Swiss francs, US dollars, or just looking to access different options for diversification purposes. And anytime you exchange foreign currencies, the bank that you use is going to make a profit on those transactions. Now, you'll notice I didn't include mortgages or retail lending on this list, and that's because the vast majority of offshore and international banks that accept foreign non-residents don't engage in retail lending, which is really important if you're considering a deposit that is above deposit insurance thresholds, or even banks in countries where deposit insurance doesn't exist. And that's the perfect segue into step number 4 of opening your offshore bank account, which is all about money. More specifically, deciding how much money to deposit offshore. Now, before I explain this further, it's important to remember that offshore and international banking isn't a replacement for retail banking. So you're not going to be finding zero deposit accounts. Instead, you should be expecting deposits that start around $50,000 and go up to a few $1,000,000. Now, there are lower deposit options that can range from as low as $5,000, but frankly, if you're not coming in with at least $25,000 to $50,000, then the costs of banking offshore, they don't really make sense for you. Unless, of course, you just want a backup account for a rainy day. Now, here you're looking at high fee accounts because banks can't generate a meaningful return on your deposit. But I appreciate that everyone is in a different financial position, and maybe you have a specific amount that you want to deposit. So here's what we can do. If you tell us the amount that you want to deposit, when you fill out the free assessment linked in the description below, we'll let you know where you can open. So you don't have to worry about guessing and trying to find banks that meet your specific requirements. On the other hand, if you just want me to tell you 6 of the easiest places to open an offshore bank account right now, you should click this video. I'll even share a few remote options with very low deposits and tell you exactly how much those deposits are going to be. And I'll help you decide which country is best for you. So give that a click and I'll see you over there.